Okay, here we go. I don't know what I'm getting into this evening. um, I just know that I want to read more Gendlin, and this is the next in the list to read, so I pulled it up, but I really don't know much about it. It is called The Function of Experiencing Two Issues: Interpretation and Therapy, Focus on the Present. This was written or published in 1958. So I'm making this video on the back of several papers that were published in 1957 by Gendlin. A Process Model, his book, which I am also reading, I want to note is that was published in 1997. So these papers are like way early for him. And then he only passed away. Let me double check. Oops. I'm so good at making YouTube videos where I keep you super highly engaged because the drop off on these videos is gonna be incredibly good with this whole like, what the fuck is he doing? Just being quiet, looking up shit on Google. Gendlin only passed away in 2017. Wow. That is wild. That is wild. So he is recent. Like Gendlin himself may have even had Twitter. Why don't we look at that? Eugene Gendlin Twitter. He literally could have had. Oh my god, no way. There's no way this is real. Someone must have made this for him, right? Right? I mean, the posts only... What? If that's real, that is crazy. GG Gendlin. Okay, anyway, where was I? This paper. So, the function of experiencing two issues: interpretation and therapy, focus on the present. So, what have I read already? I've read one where he explains what he means by experiencing. I read one where he talks about relationship through a process model, where he talks about what is a relationship when we go off the assumption that, or the premise that we ourselves are, the idea of self is not a static thing but a process and an interaction. So I read those. I read the 6 steps of focusing from the Focusing Institute website. I think I've read others, but I can't remember what they are right now. So let's just go. Let's read this one. Again, I don't really know what the hell I'm about to get into, but let's do it. So the previous paper defined experiencing. Oh, I read the Improvisation Provides, which was amazing. The previous paper defined experiencing and a few other terms that refer to experiencing. In this paper, these terms will be applied to 2 currently discussed issues in the theory of psychotherapy: the issue concerning interpretation in therapy, and the issue concerning focus on the present. First, however, what is meant by experiencing will again be described. So, yeah, interpretation and focus on the present. Those are the big themes of this paper. So, description of experiencing in therapy. Let us describe a client discussing a problem. First, there is the discussion of the problem. That is, the client's words, concepts, views, events described. Then, secondly, there is the client's inner phenomenal field, which includes not only what he is saying, but also anything to which, at that moment, he could give his inward attention. Phenomenal field, phenomenology, right? Perception of phenomena of all kind, of any and all kind, anything that can be perceived as a phenomenon. An inner phenomenal field, right? So the things that are perceivable within oneself. Anything which he could put his attention on. So he may not have his attention on it, but he could. I have distinguished two very roughly outlined elements, the content and the phenomenally given. By content, I mean anything a person explicitly says or thinks. Such contents might be, I think I'm angry, or my relations to person A are like my relations to my mother, or anything of the sort. These are cognitive contents or conceptual contents. They are explicit. By phenomenally given, I mean anything to which the person can give his inward attention. Anything which he can inwardly point to and call this. My term for this phenomenally given is experiencing. I shall describe it more fully. I know I'm going to be getting ahead of him by saying this, but he says, we call it this, right? And he often uses the 4 periods, not exactly the ellipses, but ... to describe this, right? There's no word for it, but it's a something. It's you can notice it, but you don't have the ability to describe it explicitly. You can point to it inwardly, right? That is experiencing. In one sense, experiencing could include everything to which a person may give his attention. In a slightly more restricted sense, I apply the term to everything given to the inward attention of the person, other than explicit contents, as described in one above. So, everything to which a person may give his attention, right? Inner phenomena, within anything that may come within one's perception internally, but then in a more restricted sense, everything that is not explicit. So everything that is not explicit contents, as in words, concepts, views, events described. Things that can be put into words explicitly at this moment are explicit, and in a restricted sense do not count perhaps as experiencing. Experiencing includes what is loosely termed emotion, that is, feelings of love, hatred, anger, fear, anxiety, etc. However, it also includes feelings which are not emotions. For example, it includes, I feel I had something to say a moment ago, but I forgot that. Let me concentrate on that feeling I have of what it was, so I can remember it. Experiencing also includes feelings, as exemplified by the following familiar example. The situation with my boss feels like that incident with my father. Or the converse example, I can intellectually see how my relationship with my boss is just like my relationship with my father, but I don't feel it. I just know it from figuring it out. It just occurred to me, because I've always been kind of curious about this distinction about, when we just casually talk and you might say, I feel like blah, 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 and you kind of say an opinion or an idea or a perspective, right? I feel like this isn't interesting, or I feel like this movie's dumb, or whatever. You could say, I think that, right? But it has become much more normal, certainly for me in the past half decade or so, to say I feel like, and I've always been unsure about that, because I'm like, why am I saying I feel? I'm stating a thought. I'm stating an explicit thought. Is it just lazy of me to say I feel? But this kind of adds more nuance to that, because it's not always right. What we're trying to express sometimes is only an approximation of this feeling that we have. So we have a felt sense of a situation, we have a felt sense about something, a movie, about a person, about an experience. And we don't have a fully formed thought about it necessarily, but we have a felt sense about it. And so maybe that's why we say I feel. Maybe that's why I say I feel like blah blah blah, right? And then you say some explicit thing, but in a way what you're really saying is, this situation with my boss feels like that incident with my father. It's an equation. The two situations are equated in as much as the feeling is similar, but not necessarily other factors. I don't know. Anyway, I could spend too much time trying to parse that out, but I think it opens it up, because I think I've been stuck in limbo for a while now, being like, well, emotions. If you want to say feel about how you feel. Say feel about your emotions, and say think when it's thoughts. But yeah, with Gendlin, he gets more intricate there, where it's like there's more than just thoughts and emotions. There's stuff about which we only have a felt sense. And it is more accurate to say feeling in that case. So, yeah. Feelings which are not emotions. It would be interesting. I don't think he's exactly defined what emotions are. Maybe he did do that in the last paper I read, where he talked about emotions and feelings as the precursor to expressive action. So emotions are the inward sort of beginning of an action that then takes place outwardly, right? Like anger. It's like the outward expression of anger might be to push someone away, or to like forcefully say no. It's a sort of pushing back against somebody who's pushing inward on your own boundaries and person and inner emotional life, right? So you're like, go the fuck away, get out of my space. Anger is that feeling of pushing out, pushing something away. Fear, right? On the other hand, is like running away, shrinking back from something, getting smaller, and hiding. So there's a somatic. They are somatic, and that's what like dance and acting is really interesting to study around this stuff, because in dance and in acting, it's all about giving full expression to these feelings in a way that in our day-to-day civilized life we tend to not allow ourselves to do. But I've done acting classes, and sometimes, it depends what kind of classes you're in, but you spend a lot of time practicing just what would it be like to fully express with your entire body how you feel in this moment right now. Like, forget about being polite, forget about what's normal or how it looks. What would it just straight up look like, or what would it be like to just express how you feel right now, however that is, whether it's anxiety, joy, anger, etc. Express that with your whole body. It's really interesting to do. It really helps you feel alive. Anyway, rabbit hole. I think that paragraph makes sense. Holy crap, this is a big one. In a previous paper, I have tried to show that this experiencing is not what is ordinarily termed experience. The construct experience includes all kinds of content which is not now capable of receiving the individual's direct inner attention. Experiencing is a datum of direct inner attention, but it includes much which is implicit. By implicit, I mean that such a feeling can later be conceptualized. At the moment at which it is felt and referred to, however, it is not conceptualized. It is a felt datum. We know it has implicit meaning because when it is given direct reference and attention, it often opens up into a great many meanings. Sometimes it turns out to be an emotion. I'm scared. That's it, just scared. Other times it turns out to be a complex meaning. Oh, that's what it was. I was scared of the meeting tonight because so-and-so is going to attack me, and I won't know what to do because I'll want to attack him back, and I won't feel able to do it because I'm too angry, and all my anger will pour out, and then I'll be ashamed. That was fun. We see from such common examples that a momentary this, given as a feeling in one's experiencing, can implicitly be a whole wealth of meanings, finally differentiated, gradually opening up to conceptualization. Okay. Experience. I don't know what he means when he says this. Experience. The construct experience includes all kinds of content which is not now capable of receiving the individual's direct inner attention. I don't know what an example of that is, but experiencing is a datum, a piece of data of direct inner attention. So it's something that we can attend to inwardly, whereas the construct experience includes stuff that we cannot do that with. Yeah, I don't know what he means, to be honest. Okay, but it's implicit. So, as opposed to explicit, as he described before, being fully conceptualized, that we can give words to. Implicit, the feeling can later be conceptualized, but right now we can be aware of it, but we don't have a concept for it. We don't have words for it. We don't know how to describe it. It's simply a this, a that, a something, right? A ... It's there for us, and we can be aware of it, but we don't know how to talk about it yet. That's the difference between implicit and explicit. What it is exactly, the meaning of it, is not yet available to us, but it opens up or it often can open up when we give it attention. Okay. Experiencing is basically defined as the datum of direct reference of the individual, his direct attention to his flow of feeling at a given moment. Direct attention to his flow of feeling at a given moment. So, if you do meditation, you close your eyes, take a couple breaths, and you just notice what are the feelings in your body, right? Noticing the tension in your body, noticing your stomach rumbling, noticing your heart beating, noticing the warmth or chill coursing around your body. All that stuff, right? Pressure in your bladder or in your intestines, pressure around your sternum, perhaps, a knot in your belly, choking up, right? If you're feeling sad and you notice that you're almost going to cry, and you notice that sort of locking up of your throat, tension in your forehead, etc. Pulsing headache. These are all examples of the things, the flow of feeling in oneself that you can direct your attention to. That is all experiencing. Maybe you have a tingly sensation on your skin, on your arms, whatever it is. So, it is the contention of these papers that experiencing plays a vital role in therapy. In earlier papers, I have cited many examples of common occurrences in therapy in which it is quite clear that the client is referring directly to something inwardly given to him, which is not an explicit concept or content, nor necessarily an emotion, but rather a feeling or a felt this. Okay. It is a contention of these papers that experiencing played as vital role. Yeah, we've talked about that. Let me just scroll and see if there's like a natural midway point. Maybe I'll stop here. Okay. When a client discusses a problem, therefore, the counselor does not simply respond to the concepts. He responds to the present experiencing in the client from which these concepts just now take rise. It is necessary to give the client time, room, and silence so that we may confront and refer to the inwardly given feel of what he is saying. Usually, we help him to do so by reflecting his feeling, that is, by focusing on some felt aspect of what he is saying. My contention here is that such a reflection of feeling is helpful, not only because he may have some emotion, which he isn't making explicit, but because his concepts are only one particular spoken aspect of his felt present experiencing. If he can be helped to give his inward attention to this experience, to the present feel of the thing he discusses, he will soon come up with better, deeper, more trenchant concepts as his implicit feelings open up into deeper meanings. Sorry, I'm literally going to take a photo of this and send it to a friend. That passage. I think he would like it. Okay, so the thing I really like here, the way that it was articulated, was concepts are only one particular spoken aspect of his felt present experiencing. This is not a direct, perfect analogy or anything, but I really enjoy hip-hop, and I have been talking about it with various people a lot lately. And something true for me is that when I listen to music, the actual lyrics and what's being said is something that is very far down on my list of what I pay attention to. It's like far down on my list of priorities, or just where I'm drawn to pay attention to first. The actual words and what is meant, that's not like the most interesting thing to me. A lot more is the quality of the voice, the rhyming, the flow in hip-hop. That's one of my favorite things about hip-hop, is the flow of rappers and how the rhythm of their voice. There are so many aspects to voice, and this is just why I love thinking about and studying voice in general, is because there's so much more to voice and speech than the words that are spoken. So the concepts themselves are like only one tiny fraction of what is actually being experienced and attempting to be communicated. I've said this elsewhere, but there's a book I really like that I read a while back called How to Argue and Win Every Time, by this trial lawyer named Jerry Spence. And it's sort of a clickbaity title, but in it he talks about what it even means to argue, and he kind of breaks down what you would assume that it means right away. But he also talks about the power and the necessity of being able to express your inner feeling and charisma. He talks a lot, at least one whole chapter is just on charisma and the power of being able to communicate more than just words and arguments and logic. And he suggests, for example, or at least imagining picking just one random word out of the dictionary, or a name out of the phone book, and imagining all of the millions of ways that single word can be expressed out loud, and the infinity of meanings that can be expressed in those different ways while saying one single word, and so all those nuances are not contained in the concept or the word itself. It's contained in everything else. So yeah, I think that's what I think about when Gendlin talks about this, is when you're listening to somebody, if you're only listening to the concept and the specific words and not everything else, then you're missing most of it, right? And that's something that is also true about writing, and that's kind of where writing is tricky, because it's writing is stripped of all of that intricacy and nuance. On the other hand, writing, I suppose, when it's done well, I don't know if I really put this together before, but like writing is, or a value or a virtue of writing can be to communicate in such a way that, I think you have to go through this process of like doing the kind of thing that Gendlin is expressing here, right? About getting really clear about what you mean by focusing on your felt sense, so that you can articulate as accurately possible in explicit terms what you mean. Right? So in one sense, the ideal of writing is to be able to express as much as possible of what you mean in words alone, right? Without relying on any of the intricacy and nuance that comes with voice. And that's not easy, but it is interesting. Anyway, that's tangential to this. So, yeah, reflecting the feeling is meaning like listening to more than just the words, listening to everything else. And even listening to everything else in a more sensitive way than the client himself may even be capable of, Sometimes we are not even sensitive enough to ourselves to notice the quality of our body and our voice and our way of expressing ourselves, right? Like we don't even realize how much is being said in and around our words. And so the therapist can be there to be like, oh, you're saying XYZ thing, but like how you're saying it is expressing all this other stuff, all this other feeling. And by reflecting that back, the therapist can help a person direct their inner attention to their feeling instead of their words, and then go deeper into what is actually being experienced. Okay. Our description has attempted to show what is meant by experiencing, and that it has a vital function in therapeutic change. The phrase function of experiencing in the therapeutic change refers to a broad area of data which needs to be studied. A great many aspects of this role of experiencing must be differentiated and made experientially measurable. Right now, we have only very few terms which refer to experiencing, such as the global term experiencing itself, and a few other terms: direct reference, intense, implicitly meaningful, felt. Since experiencing plays a vital role in therapeutic change, many theoretical issues really concern experiencing. Current discussions of these issues are obscure because reference to experiencing is sometimes assumed and sometimes not. Such reference to experiencing is hidden, assumed, not stated. Theoretical terms are needed which explicitly refer to experiencing and its role in therapy. By applying the term experiencing to two such issues, the present paper hopes to explicate the assumed imprecise reference to experiencing and thereby to clarify these issues. So let me see. So the function of experiencing it there. So what role does experiencing, that direct reference of the flow of life within oneself inwardly, what role does that play in therapeutic change? We don't have well, again, this was written in 1958, but at the time anyway, and I would say still now, we don't have that much language and concepts and words with which to talk about that. There's also just like general taboos around talking about that, right? And in so much literature, scientific literature, like research psychology literature, there's this tendency to want to write objectively about everything. And so you never really hear anyone talking about subjective internal experience, or if you do hear about it, you hear about it as if it's like a doctor talking about the internal experiencing of a patient. So it's really removed, but it's never like first person subjective. Or I mean, not never, but it's not that common. And that's built into how we're often taught to write, is never talk about yourself, never use the first person in academic writing or professional writing, which I think is extremely limiting. But at the end of the day, right, therapeutic change is about subjective change. It's about change within the person. And so if we want to talk about theoretical approaches to that, we're talking ultimately about the subjective experience of a person, the internal experience of a person. And so if we have no way to talk about the internal experience of a person on a subjective first person in that way, then we're really at a loss. We're like trying to talk about a thing without ever being able to just talk about the thing, just dancing around the issue. Okay. We now turn to the first of these two issues, interpretation in therapy. 1 second while I reheat my tea. Okay, interpretation in therapy. Client-centered therapists are responsible for the misunderstanding of their therapy, according to which they add nothing to what the client says. Such a method rightly seems to many people to be trivial as well as impossible. Since, however, this is the impression created by client-centered therapy itself, communication on this issue is at a minimum. So client-centered therapists, as in therapists in the tradition of Carl Rogers, who was Eugene Gendlin's primary mentor within psychology. Keep in mind, again, Eugene Gendlin's PhD is in philosophy. He is not a academically, professionally trained therapy person. That is just kind of his secondary thing. But he did graduate work under Carl Rogers at U Chicago. So client-centered therapy is a Carl Rogers thing, and within client-centered therapy, reflective listening, I know there's another term for it, active listening, I think, right? It's just this from the outside, what looks like mirroring just whatever the client says. You're just like, the client's talking and they're like, oh, I'm sad about this, and the therapist is like, okay, you're sad about that, and it looks from the outside really stupid, as if like nothing's happening, as if there's no skill being exercised, right? It's like, oh, you're literally just parroting whatever the client says. That's really, wow, good job. So it sounds like Gendlin is saying that the impression that it is so simple and silly comes from client-centered therapists themselves. Okay. Actually, both interpretive and client-centered therapists help the client conceptualize more than he originally conceptualized. Both types of therapists aim at maximal depth. Their notion of depth, however, is different. They also differ about what and how they aid the client to conceptualize. Interesting. I want to kind of just take a stab at what he means before we actually go on. Considering what I know about focusing and having led a lot of focusing and do a lot myself, what you're actually doing with that mirroring kind of communication is helping a person do that resonating step of focusing, where a person reflects and sense inwardly at their raw experiencing. They notice a felt sense and they try to find a handle for it. They try to give it words. They try to put language to that felt sense, right? And then in the 6 steps of focusing, as they're outlined in the main focusing book, you get a handle, and then you resonate that back. You check it back against the felt sense. So you're like, okay, I got this word for it. It's like mad. Is mad the right? Is that it? And so you check back, and you can tell. You can have like a somatic resonance if that word actually is an accurate symbol for the felt sense. And if it's not, then you know that, and you can look for a better, more accurate symbol to talk about the feeling. So when you're in a therapeutic situation, by having a therapist, for example, reflect the words back to the client, it's helping the client check against their own felt sense of what they said to see whether it's accurate or not, and if it's not accurate, to then gain even more clarity, go deeper into the intricacy of what they're experiencing, and find something accurate for what they're experiencing, right? And that's how you get depth. There's no interpretation going on there, but it's going deep into really accurately articulating the intricacy of our experience moment by moment. So anyway, that's that. I'm curious to see what he says about interpretive. So 2 senses of depth. A person very often shows more of his experience than he is aware of. Depth in therapy refers to the counselors responding to what the client is showing but is not aware of. Such showing may be divided into 2 sorts, although the line is sometimes difficult to draw. One kind of showing consists of symptomatic signs which are clear to a psychologically sophisticated observer, but are totally outside of the present awareness of the person. Maybe this is kind of what he was getting at before about experience, the construct not being something that we can fully direct our attention to, right? Like, we may be exhibiting behaviors and ways of communicating that we just have no awareness of. Yeah, I know that to be true in my own experience. So these might be called signs of the repressed. This sign of depth might be termed depth of repression. So it's like you're angry, but you have spent your whole life not allowing yourself to express anger and pushing it down and shoving it down and like making it a shadow, right? That it nonetheless is getting expressed in some way through how you speak and how you carry yourself and stuff like that, what you say about things, yet you yourself are not aware of the anger. That's definitely a thing. So another kind of showing consists of what the person now feels and expresses, but is not fully aware of having expressed. Okay, wait, that sounds like the other thing. One kind of showing consists of symptomatic signs. Symptomatic signs versus I need an example. It sounds like the things that I would imagine as examples for this first thing sound like the same kind of things that I would imagine for the second thing. But another kind of showing consists of what the person now feels and expresses, but is not fully aware of having expressed. Note that the two phrasings are still so similar that confusion is possible. People's felt experiencing in each moment is much broader than their explicit conceptualized awareness. Present experiencing is largely neither repressed nor explicitly aware. It is present and felt, but implicit. In social situations, there are often no explicit responses to much of present experiencing, and no opportunity as well as no symbols to aid the individual's awareness of it. Hence, it passes by with a minimum of explicit awareness. Yet, such felt experiencing is present. Much of it can be made explicit because it is here now. However, it occurs as unconceptualized and implicit and merely felt. I wish there was more concrete examples in this, but present experiencing is largely neither repressed nor explicitly aware, right? So it's neither completely out of awareness, nor is it completely explicit, right? Like we might feel it, but we don't know what it is, so we don't really like take it seriously, right? That's what felt sense is generally. It's like you can't really talk about it yet, and it's probably really subtle. And so you don't really give it any time and attention, right? You just kind of skip over it. As he says, in social situations. It's interesting that he points that out. In social situations. I mean, social situations is just between people, like even just two people. Right? So much of what goes on between two people is not just in the words spoken to each other, right? And let alone what we notice in the other person, as well as our own felt sense of the situation. Those things being implicit, being nonverbal, are easily skipped over and ignored and let to pass by. Even though it is possible to be aware of it, because it is happening moment by moment. It's felt, but it remains and occurs unconceptualized and implicit, yeah. With the use of the term present experiencing, we are able to clarify the issue between interpretive and client-centered responses. In both methods, the therapist aids the client to conceptualize. Client-centered therapy aids the client to conceptualize his present experiencing. The therapist endeavors to help the client refer to and conceptualize as deeply as possible his present experiencing. The word depth in this method means depth of present experiencing in this moment. Excuse me. Let us call it implicitly present depth. This sense of depth refers to what is now most deeply felt, perhaps also most removed from the superficial verbal level. It refers to what is now most personal and self-referent, rather than situations and other people whom the client is discussing. For example, if the client is discussing Mrs. A's peculiarities and nasty behavior, the response, "The way A acts really makes you feel helpless," provided it accurately conceptualizes the client's implicit expression of present experiencing, is a deeper response than A does so-and-so, and if you do this, she does so-and-so. The client-centered therapist aims at conceptualization of the implicitly present depth of the present experiencing. The two definitions of depth, then, are depth 1, depth is repression, includes what is not present and felt implicit experiencing, but is true of the person in general and is part of his experience. The term experience refers to all that can be theoretically posited to occur in him. Something which is deeply repressed may have observable signs or symptoms, and these may be present at a given moment. And then 2, implicitly present depth refers to what is now felt, although it may be implicit and unconceptualized. It may be referred to as this even before its meaning is implicit. It is implicitly present and implicitly expressed. So, I'm still kind of confused about this first one, but I think I have some ways to understand it. So, the big distinction seems to be between whether it's felt or not. Like whether the person is able to be aware of it. And I'm thinking of, like in The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk specifically talks about this one woman who, like a very traumatized woman who goes in for a massage and is getting her feet massaged and like can't even, it's crazy to say this because it seems like almost not even possible, but like can't register that her feet are being massaged. Like if she's asked at that moment, like where is she being massaged, she can't tell you that it's on her feet because she's so disconnected from her somatic awareness. Like it's hard to imagine that, but I know that in much less intense ways I've experienced pretty serious disconnection from my body. So it's like it may be happening, right? It may even be like a behavioral thing, right? Like you might be slouched, or you might be, like having some kind of facial tic or something, or your voice might be whatever, right? Like my voice right now, I'm tired. It's kind of effortful to express. It's not really loud and really deep and really resonant feeling. But if I was very disconnected from my voice in general and how it felt in my body, I might not, even though that's happening and would be observable to another person, that might not be something that I myself could become aware of. Like I couldn't actually direct my attention to it. And so maybe that is what's meant by this depth of repression. It's just like, it could be, like it's observable, it could be something that the client is aware of, but for whatever reason, they don't have the degree of awareness to notice it. On the other hand, the implicitly present depth is about what can be referred to. That's how I'm understanding it so far. So, therapeutic change occurs in terms of experiencing, not concepts. The feeling which a client refers to and expresses is not itself a conceptual content, such as, I think I am angry, but a present experiencing. A concept, such as I am angry, conceptualizes an aspect of this present datum. This latter implicitly contains much more than is conceptualized by any given conceptualization. Any one conceptual content is only one of a great many implicitly present, unconceptualized contents. The client-centered therapist endeavors to help the client refer to, conceptualize, and feel his present experiencing as deeply and as awarely as possible. Necessarily, much of its implicit meanings will remain implicit. Both client and therapist endeavor to refer, as deeply as possible and as constantly as possible, to the client's ongoing, changing, present, implicitly meaningful experiencing. Therapeutic change occurs primarily in the experiencing, not in the small part of it which is conceptualized. So this concept contains more, or like it refers to, or it's representing more than is communicated in those three words, right? When you say I am angry, there's so much actual experiencing that you're referring to that is not fully expressed and described through those three words. So much of it is still implicit, like all the stuff about how the anger feels in your body, how it makes you want to move, who the anger is directed towards, like how intense is the anger, how the anger feels in you, how you're experiencing the anger. None of that is explicit within this statement, I am angry. And so that content, that conceptual content, is only one of a great many implicitly present, unconceptualized contents, right? So you could say, I am angry, but that's only one of many things that you could say to conceptualize that experience. You could also say, I want to fucking punch a guy in the face. I think I use punching a lot. Interpret that how you will. right? But like you can conceptualize that more in more ways, or you could say like my body feels hot and I feel like it takes a lot of effort to restrain myself from moving and attacking this other person in some way. There's a lot of different ways to talk about I am angry, all of which are different ways to conceptualize the feeling, the experiencing. Therapeutic change occurs primarily in the experiencing, not in the small part of it, which is conceptualized, right? So like the results of therapy, right? Like what you want out of therapy isn't the words that you can say, it's the experiencing, it's the raw feeling of yourself and of your life. You want that to change as a result of therapy. You don't want to just be like, oh yeah, I'm angry, and I am angry because my father never allowed me to, be whatever when I was a kid. And so like now you have an interpretation and you can say more words about it, but your actual experience of it might be unchanged, right? And I think Gendlin would say it. I would say, I wonder if you would agree that what really have you gotten out of therapy if the only thing new is that you can talk in more detail, in more theoretical ways about your experiencing, but the experiencing itself is the same. If you still feel as angry as before, and you don't, nothing has changed in that respect, like I don't think the therapy has really worked. To the client-centered therapist, the use in the therapeutic hour of diagnostic concepts and deductions of the client's repressed dynamics is interruptive of the client's attention to present experiencing. Rather than aiding the client to conceptualize deeply his present experiencing, such interpretations tend to move the client's attention away from his present experiencing and instead move his attention toward a conceptual, general level. Of course, such intellectualized interpretations can be said to have varying depth, but it is depth in the sense of depth of repression. For example, in the repression sense of depth, Oedipal conflicts would be said to lie deeper than difficulties one encounters with some person A. Hence, the client talking about Mrs. A's nasty behavior would be considered to be on a more superficial level than a client talking about his Oedipal conflicts. If, on the other hand, we consider depth in the sense of implicitly present depth of experiencing, we can state that a client might be discussing either subject with equal depth or equal superficiality. He might have and refer to very little present experiencing while talking with great psychological sophistication about Mrs. A or about his own Oedipal conflicts. Conversely, a client may be experiencing and be aided to experience and conceptualize his present experiencing regarding Mrs. A, and he might be helped to refer to it and to conceptualize it very deeply. Quite possibly, his recent experiencing regarding Mrs. A is relevant to his Oedipal conflicts. Thus, his Oedipal conflicts might change therapeutically when he deeply feels, refers to, and conceptualizes his present experiencing regarding person A. So let me see if I can boil that down, right? So you could talk about what's going on in the situation with Mrs. A, and you can just talk about it and you can tell the stories about it, but you can do so without ever referring to your own present experiencing, right? You could be like, she did that and I was angry and like blah 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 and like fuck her and what right does she have to blah blah and I just want to like yell at her and blah blah. You can do all that without ever referring to your present experiencing, right? That raw somatic flow of life within you, right? You can talk about all that without being like, oh, like I literally feel right now this feeling in my body of like tension or like heat or like pressure in my chest or like this energy that wants to break out of my body. Like you can talk all you want about the situation and it's superficial on an experiencing level if you never refer to experiencing. And likewise with the Oedipal thing, you can be like, oh, my relationship to my mother, blah blah blah, like, you know, talk about Oedipal stuff, Oedipus complex stuff, again, purely with theory, without ever referring to your experience. Whereas you could do it with referring to experience. You could be like, well, this experience, this situation with Mrs. A, it reminds me of my relationship to my mother and like shit that happened between me and my father and my mother when I was a child. And as I say that, I'm noticing that I have this sense of like in my body, my muscles are like sapped of energy and I feel weak and I feel like slumping over, right? So you can refer to your experiencing and to the theoretical stuff, and that's what makes it deep on an experiential level. But if you don't refer to your experiencing, then it's superficial, whether you're talking about Oedipal things or just day-to-day things. So this example illustrates the client-centered assumption that therapeutic change occurs in terms of felt present experiencing, not necessarily in terms of concepts. Therapeutic change occurs in the feeling that you have, in the flow of life that you can refer to in yourself, not in the things that you can say about yourself. Not the abstractions, but the raw experience, which is implicit and not yet verbal. So, client-centered theory needs terms with which to view therapeutic change in experiencing. The client-centered method of therapy, in practice, maximally aids the client to feel, refer to, and conceptualize present experiencing. The whole method is geared to give maximal room, attention, reception, and focus to what is deeply implicit in present experiencing. The whole method is geared to give maximal to what is deeply implicit in present experiencing. Yeah. So it's not about interpretation. It's not about theorizing and making meaning and like conceptual. It's not about like, yeah. It's not like it's not psychoanalysis, right? You're not analyzing it. It's the approach is about helping a person gain even more intricate and accurate ability to attend to the depth of what they are actually feeling moment by moment. So, many interpretive therapeutic theories also hold that therapeutic change occurs through experiencing rather than concepts. Such theories need to answer the question, how does therapeutic change, rather than mere conceptual understanding, come about? For example, let us agree that a given interpretation is correct. How does one make it useful to the patient? What process in him uses the interpretation for therapeutic change? And how does the therapist aid this process? The mere concepts of the interpretation, nearly everyone agrees, do not in themselves overcome the defenses. If there are no defenses against the interpretation, then it is unnecessary in the first place. And if there are defenses, how are these overcome? Surely they are overcome bit by bit in terms of the patient's experiencing, even if he grasps the concept right away. How is he helped in this gradual experiencing? Interesting. Yeah, so that's how I've understood Gendlin's work so far, is like what actually leads to therapeutic change. What's the relationship between the things that we can conceptualize and talk about in theory and our actual experience, our actual subjective experience? How do we take something, right? How do we take an assessment, an interpretation of ourselves, and actually allow that to change our felt experience of life, right? Because that's a common thing. That's like a trope with therapy, is like, oh yeah, I know that like I have a codependent relationship with my mother or whatever, like, or my girlfriend, or like I know that I am anxious avoidant, right? Like you know what attachment style you have, but like nothing changes. You now know this interpretation, which may very well be correct, but the interpretation itself isn't the same thing as change. So how do those two things relate to each other, and how does the interpretation lend itself to change? What has to happen inside of the person for the change to actually occur? And that's where experiencing comes in. And that's where Eugene Gendlin's whole work is about that. What goes on in a person such that conceptual things can be incorporated and lead to experiential change. So these then are some of the questions which this discussion raises. I'm going to stop here. Client-centered assumptions concerning experience. So I don't know when I'll do the next bit. Hopefully tomorrow. And for now, have a great rest of your day. I am tired. And I need to get some rest. So till next time, take care.